A reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, he took off his outer clothing, and he wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began washing his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." And now from Galatians chapter 5, 22 through 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. I want to take a closer look at a moment from the gospel. It says, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So Jesus knows all that is about to unfold: the cross, the death, the tremendous suffering that awaits him, the betrayal of his closest friend Judas, the denial of Simon Peter, the desertion of his closest friends and followers, and he's living in the shadow of that loss, of that grief, of that death. And in this shadow, he kneels and he washes the feet of the very men soon to betray him, deny him, and desert him. He loved them to the end. Loss and grief are one of the few truly universal human experiences. Every human being, all of us, will experience loss, grief, and suffering to some degree and at some point in our lifetimes. I've just finished reading this fantastic book, Theo of Golden. If you've read it, you know. If you haven't, go buy it. It's worth the read. But the premise of the story is there's an older man named Theo, and he comes to a new town called Golden. And in a local coffee shop adorning the walls, he discovers these beautiful hand-drawn portraits of many of the townspeople. And so he decides he's going to purchase all of them one by one and then gift them to the subjects. And new friendships unfold with each bestowal as he meets them and knows them and learns their story. And Theo observes each portrait, each face with this meticulous care and admiration, often standing in front of the frame for hours on end, looking into the eyes, observing and studying these portraits. And in each of them, he notices a universal quality of sadness. And he tells Asher, the artist, he says, "Asher, in every face I detect sadness. It's like a weariness or an unmet longing or a disappointment, something we inherit from those who lived before us. But to these old eyes, it is in every face, the universal affliction." Perhaps this universal affliction that Theo is talking about is the very thing that Jesus sees in his disciples. Maybe it's how and why he's able to have grace for them. He looks beyond the betrayal, past the pain of desertion, and instead he sees sadness and fear and loss and uncertainty, because Jesus knows all too well that loss is woven into the tapestry of our world. Not only the quiet, personal losses that we carry, but also he sees the deeper grief that lives in the world itself. He knows all too well of a grief born of injustice, born of violence and poverty and systems that wound people again and again and again, that have wounded him, that wound his friends, that will crucify him on a cross. And he sees this grief in his disciples. Just him and his friends doing the best that they can in a world that is overcome by unchecked power, by greed, hate, and oppression. And rather than allowing his pain and his fear to isolate himself from his friends, Jesus leans into love. He enters into pain with them. He kneels to wash their feet. He comforts them in the hopes that they might know in their bones that they are worthy of love. And then he implores them to go out and instill that same confidence in others, to both know and tell the world that nothing, not a single thing that you could ever do, nor anything that could ever be done unto you would ever separate you from the grace and love and mercy of God. I have set an example, it says, that you should do as I have done for you. Because Jesus knows that loss, grief, and uncertainty will happen in this life. And in Jesus, we're shown that there's still love in the midst of all of it. I'm reminded of the cost of discipleship, this invitation of Jesus in Luke chapter 9:23, where he says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." And perhaps at the heart of what Jesus is saying in this so often quoted passage, whoever wants to live like Christ, to experience the fullness of God, must take up their cross or enter into their grief, into their loss, into their sorrow, and in that surrender, follow Christ into the fullness of love and grace and relationship. And it's not an easy task that Jesus is inviting us into, to face one's pain, to sit with others in the midst of theirs. But we know just how insidious grief is. How, when unattended, grief, it grows slowly beneath the surface. And it manifests itself in our lives too often as anger and shame and resentment. And when grief remains unattended, rather than leaning into love, we isolate ourselves in addiction. We work incessantly to the point of burnout. We lose ourselves to media and screens. We turn to alcohol or drugs as a way of blocking the pain. We lash out in anger. We become self-obsessed, anything to avoid the pain rather than facing it head on. And we isolate ourselves from love. Unattended grief does not disappear. It just finds new ways to come out. And when grief is not cared for, it wreaks havoc upon ourselves, upon our hearts, and upon those around us. Throughout this Lenten season, we've been invited into an awareness of what lies beneath the surface. That's why we've chosen the iceberg as our picture metaphor for this season, that there's so much that lies beneath of the surface that what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. And so we're invited into an awareness of all of that that lies beneath the surface, but it's not an awareness that judges or grips tightly. It's just awareness that simply notices, non-judgmentally, an awareness that holds things lightly and tenderly. And so as I've attempted to practice this kind of mindful awareness that we're being invited into, I've begun to notice something. When I can simply and non-judgmentally notice, just notice all of my shame, all of my anger, and all of my resentment. Underneath it, I find heartache. Heartache that has been hidden and masked by emotions and energies that do not serve me. I can't love well when I wallow in shame. I can't love well when I cling too tightly to anger, and I can't find grace when I remain resentful. But I can move through heartache. I can take up my cross and follow, enter into my pain and find grace and love and redemption. And if I, the broken and flawed human that I am, can find heartache and longing where resentment and anger once gripped so tightly, if I can find grace for myself beneath my shame, how much more can God do that for me? In the person of Jesus Christ, God entered into grief with all of humanity. God actively enters into your grief and into mine. Peter Scazzaro, who wrote the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality that we've been following throughout Lent, he goes so far as to say that addressing pain and addressing all that lies beneath the surface, it's not simply the emotionally healthy thing to do, but it's actually the biblical thing to do. And he rightly notices how the church so often gets it wrong. He writes, much of contemporary Christian culture has added to this inhuman and unbiblical avoidance of pain and loss. Have you ever been told that if you just believed in God enough that your pain would go away? Or maybe that you shouldn't allow yourself to be sad, but should rejoice in the Lord always. Maybe you've even been told that your pain and your suffering are a direct result of your unbelief. I want to tell you that that is nonsense. Free yourself. Free yourself, my friend, from the notion that your grief is a punishment. Jesus grieves. Even Jesus grieves. Even Jesus doubts. Even Jesus experiences the angst of loss. Even Jesus has fears and uncertainties. Even Jesus cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Even Jesus experiences the absence of God. Even Jesus weeps in the garden, tears flowing in grief as he prays. God does not give us pain to punish us. God does not orchestrate our suffering. God does not even ask us to go out and suffer more, but just invites us into the pain that we have already experienced. And God meets us in our pain and walks with us through it. God loves us so much that God chose to come to earth and suffer with us. God enters into our pain because that's what love does. Love meets us in the midst of loss without minimizing it. And Jesus invites us into sorrow because he knows and understands that sorrow is sacred. I had lunch with my dear friend Sid this past week, and he told me of the grief of losing his wife Jory to cancer. And if you know Sid, you know how well and graciously he carries that grief, how openly and willingly he shares his story of grief with others. And he shared with me a sacred moment in the midst of that grief. Sid was at a gathering with theologians, and the topic of the talk that day was on loss and grief. And as he listened, all of that loss that Sid had been sitting with began to flow out of him in tears, began to bubble up inside of him and flow out through tears. And a young woman was sitting near him, and she reached across and she looked at him and she said, "Can I hold your hand?" And he said, "Yes." And she held his hand as he cried. And Sid told me that he knew in that moment that it was God reaching out to him through her. And she affirmed his feeling that he had had a sacred and divine encounter. Later, she told him, Sid, God told me to hold your hand. God invites us into grief. And God extends a hand to us in the midst of our tears. And God implores us to go out and do likewise. It says in the text, I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. God tells us to extend a hand to those who mourn, not a hand of judgment, not a hand of coercion, not a hand that offers unsolicited advice or quick fixes, just a hand that reaches out in loving and gracious presence. And that kind of presence, it holds far more healing power than any advice ever could. When I was in the first grade, my mom came home one evening with a surprise in her arms. It's a little black, fuzzy dog. And this dog took to our family immediately, and we took to him, and love and joy ran recklessly through our home. Love slid across corners of linoleum floors, bounding from one room to the next. Love found a new home, and our little home found new love. My mom is a dog whisperer through and through. I've never seen nor met a dog that did not take to her immediately. I mean, it's really uncanny. Even the most aggressive dogs just love on her. And so naturally, my mom and this little black fuzzy dog, they bonded straight away. And we're in the backyard, and she started doing baby talk to him like she does. She has this kind of quintessential baby talk voice she does. Oh, he was, and this is so little, and he doing like this. And the dog, he's just shaking. He's shaking in excitement, and he rolls over, and he can't contain it, and he pees up in the air. He pees all over himself. And my mom goes, hey, you made a squirt. And so he got his name, Squirt. And Squirt brought a lot of joy to our lives. He was a steady and constant source of love in our family. And after nearly 20 loyal years, it was time to say goodbye to our little Squirt. My sister and I were well into our college years, and so we both came home to be together with the family as we bid our sweet little boy farewell. And we gathered in the back room at the vet's office, and we just loved on him. We kissed him, we scratched him, we just smelled him one last time, squeezed him, and my mom held him in her arms as he passed. And as Squirt's life slowly left his little body, my brother Andy read from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, and he said, you would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life, for life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. And what is it? To cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered. And we cried together, and we held one another, and we gathered around this little, constant, fuzzy source of love. Squirt. And our grief and our joy, they bound together in that moment and knit us together more tightly and yoked to one another in the midst of loss. Our love widened and expanded and enriched. Our friend Theo of Golden, he reflects on sadness. I realize more, he says, that sadness is a gift, that living with sadness, accepting it, is easier than trying to pretend that it is not there. It is another of life's great mysteries, he ponders, that sadness and joy can coexist so compatibly with one another. In fact, I wonder if on this side of heaven, that either one can be complete without the other. And isn't this what Jesus is showing us? As he holds joy and sorrow simultaneously and with equal care for each. Jesus doesn't turn to joy to deny or escape sadness, and he doesn't lose himself in sadness and forget about joy and love and relationship. He holds both together. He becomes aware of and makes peace with both the joy of being with his friends in that moment and the sorrow of knowing that he will not be for long. And Jesus allows each reality to draw him deeper into love and grace and connection. This week's spiritual practice invites communal lament. This may feel unfamiliar. It may feel vulnerable. It may feel eerily quiet. But we're invited to name losses together. Whether you speak it aloud, whether you write them down, just hold it tenderly and gently. Trust that God is present in that space, asking you, can I hold your hand? That when no words suffice, that we may know, that you may know deep in your bones that God's presence, love's presence, is the only word that we need. And so I invite you to notice just one loss in your life that has not been fully grieved. You may have many. I know I certainly do, but just start with one. Be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with that loss. Don't analyze it. Don't judge it. Don't justify it. Don't rush towards meaning. Just hold it. Be aware of it and notice it gently before God. Grief does not destroy us. It enlarges us. It awakens us more fully to love all around. And in the midst of our grief, my friends, may we lean on one another. And may we extend a hand to one another. And may we say yes to the hand that is extended to us. May we love till the end.